My name is Catherine Voss. I was 38 years old when my family showed me exactly how little a human life is worth in their eyes. I stood on the wet grass of a cemetery in Stuttgart, a fresh grave in front of me, when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. My husband Jonas lay in that grave. My parents and my sister had completely skipped the funeral, calling it an unfortunate scheduling conflict, because they were on an already booked Caribbean cruise at the same time. Just 4 days after the funeral, my mother called me not to grieve, but to demand money. I work as an interior architect in Stuttgart, and together with Jonas, I had built a small studio 6 years earlier specializing in sustainable living space design. Jonas had been a structural engineer, calm, reliable, the kind of man who considered every detail before acting. 3 months ago, he collapsed while jogging a congenital heart defect none of us knew about. He was dead instantly. My mother Renata's first question on the phone, when I told her the news, was whether the funeral could wait 2 weeks, since she and my father had already booked a cruise months earlier. My sister Francesca wrote in the family group chat shortly after that the tickets weren't refundable. And surely I didn't expect the whole family to change their plans over something like this. Something like this, that's what they called my husband's funeral. The memorial service. The front row reserved for family stayed completely empty, while over 80 colleagues, friends, and neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder to say goodbye. My uncle Raymond was the only relative who came, and he advised me to plan my life from now on as if I had no birth family left. 4 days later, my mother finally called me from the cruise ship and, without any preamble, demanded repayment of $28,000. She claimed Francesca's planned wedding was financially at risk, and the family needed to stick together now. When I stayed silent, she said the sentence I will never forget. "We can always make more money, Catherine, but we can't create a new family." She was demanding the money for my sister's wedding while my husband was barely in the ground. That $28,000, however, had been an official gift from my parents 3 years earlier to help fund our studio's founding. The bank had required a signed gift letter at the time for the loan, in which my parents legally confirmed the money was a pure gift with no repayment obligation whatsoever. That document sat safely in my filing cabinet. The next day, my sister Francesca called to finish what my mother had started. "Listen, Catherine," she said, "you're alone now. What do you even need the money for?" They saw the loss of my husband as some kind of budget line item they'd conveniently zeroed out for me. Shortly after, my sister sent me a message claiming the family money was a shared pool I'd already drawn from once, and now it was someone else's turn. A week later, I learned from a cousin that they'd already been telling their own version of events to the entire extended family. They were spreading word that poor Francesca couldn't have her dream wedding because of her selfish sister, while I supposedly sat on my money refusing to help anyone. For one desperate moment, I sat at my kitchen table with my checkbook, ready to transfer the $28,000 just to make the phone stop ringing. My uncle Raymond caught me in the act, took the pen from my hand, and told me to stop paying them for skipping my husband's funeral. The next morning, I went back to work and decided that people who couldn't stand at my husband's grave would never receive my financial support again. It was hard to prove myself again. An experienced colleague advised me to simply make the doubters irrelevant through outstanding work. I called every client personally, worked harder than ever, and within weeks secured a major exclusive contract with a hotel chain that completely secured our studio's future. To handle this contract, I had to clear out Jonas's old office. Under a stack of old blueprints, I found his handwritten notebook, which he kept out of habit alongside his digital calculations. The last page contained no structural formulas, just a handwritten list titled "Things Will Still Do." There was his plan to open a larger office together, with no bank loans, entirely through our own effort. At the very bottom, he'd already written down a name for our future joint company, Voss and Wren Architecture, so everyone would see what we'd built together. My family had called his funeral an unfortunate scheduling conflict. I decided, in that moment, to make his name worth more than their entire cruise. I officially changed the company name to Voss and Wren and swore to myself that at my parents' upcoming anniversary celebration, I would give the unshakable truth its due, while I focused on building the studio. My family worked behind the scenes to destroy my reputation. My mother ran this smear campaign like a marketing job, sending me messages asking if I'd sought psychological help for my supposed bitterness. My cousin eventually called and told me about the plan my mother and Francesca had cooked up. My parents' 35th wedding anniversary was coming up, celebrated in a large banquet hall with the entire extended family invited. They planned to corner me there in front of over 50 guests. My father was to stand up during the toasts and publicly appeal to my conscience, so I'd look like an ungrateful daughter. That night, I opened my files and pulled out the original gift letter. I drove straight to the bank the next morning and had an officially certified stamped copy made. I packed this document along with a precise timeline into my bag. I wasn't looking for a loud confrontation. Because the strongest force in a room is never the loudest voice, it's the calm person holding the irrefutable document. The banquet hall smelled of flowers and decades of family celebrations when I walked in. Over 50 relatives were present. My mother saw me come in, and her face immediately reflected a triumphant smile. After the first toasts, my father slowly stood, tapped his fork against his glass, and waited until the room was completely silent. He announced loudly that they had helped me with $28,000 back when I had nothing, and that now, with my studio doing well, I wouldn't lift a finger for my own sister's wedding. A murmur went through the hall. Francesca added that they'd even skip the funeral for the family's sake, and this was the thanks they got. Every relative's eyes turned toward me, while my mother sat there with folded hands. Completely certain she'd won, I set down my plate calmly, stood up, and created a deep silence in the room, louder than any scream. I said calmly that we could certainly talk about the $28,000 and the funeral. I reached into my coat and pulled out the timeline. I laid it flat on the table, pointed to the dates, and explained to everyone present that my family hadn't missed my husband's funeral because of an emergency, but because they'd already booked a cruise they didn't want to change. My mother's face lost all color instantly. Francesca exploded with rage, jumped up, and screamed that I was twisting everything. I let her finish screaming, reached into my coat a second time, and laid the officially certified copy of the gift letter directly in front of my father on the table. I explained to the entire family that both parents had signed this document 3 years earlier at the bank. A document that legally proved the money was a pure gift. Their supposed debt collection was a complete lie. Dead silence filled the hall, until my Uncle Raymond stood up and loudly confirmed before all the witnesses that he'd been at the funeral and every single word I'd said was true. The relatives started passing the documents around, and the entire family's expression shifted into deep shame. I packed up my papers, left the hall, and breathed in the cold, clean air of the parking lot. Francesca's wedding was eventually postponed because the promised guests withdrew once the truth came out. I cut off contact with my parents and sister forever. Voss and Wren Architecture today runs a successful studio with 12 employees. Because true family isn't determined by blood, but by the people who stand unconditionally by your side in your hardest hours.